What is going on, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. The engine for Project Blueberry is ready to go. I spent the last couple of days finding, buying, cleaning, and installing everything onto the 24, and the last thing we did was we went to the storage unit to grab the transmission and got that slapped on last night, and now we're ready to hang it into the engine bay. I went to Harbor Freight to grab me another one of these lights right here. I love this thing for the price. It's really freaking awesome. I have another one right there, and I got two dead battery ones right here. When I went to the storage unit, I did grab my header as well too. This is a K24 header that I modified to fit into a K-swap chassis. I modified the downpipe here, and I also shortened the runners there. This was actually in the wagon before I boosted it, but now we're going to be using it onto the K24 for Blueberry. We're going to be building the exhaust system later to this header, and then we're going to build the downpipe for the turbo to where the exhaust sits. So if anything happens later down the road, this header should just bolt right up from the head to the exhaust system. The goal in this video is to hang the 24 in Project Blueberry, and with that being said, let's grab the motor mounts. Now, I spoke about these motor mounts in the unboxing video, but I will touch topics on it once more. These fitted the budget that I have for Project Blueberry, and this thing literally is a complete mount kit that you need to put a K into your chassis. So right now I'm gonna go ahead and lay everything out on the table and get rid of all of these boxes. We have the mount that sits on the subframe. We have the mount that sits on the post mount on the passenger side. We have the rear T-bracket that goes from the rear of the engine to the subframe mount. This right here is the rear subframe mount to the T-bracket. Driver side transmission mount to the frame rail. This right here is the transmission bracket for the RSX, the EP3, the Element, and the Honda CR-V. This is different if you're running the Honda Accord or the TSX transmission. Take note. And the first thing we're going to be starting off with is the passenger side frame mount, because this is the one that needs to be bolted onto the frame rail before we can put the motor inside the engine bay. And of course, they provide all of the hardware. So this mount right here has to go on the passenger side frame rail, and I kind of already made a boo-boo. So this thing right here is obviously eBay, and not all the time it is a perfect fit. So I was trying to test fit it without realizing that it was super duper tight, and I kind of scratched up my frame rail a little bit right there. But the bracket sits there, so hopefully it's not too noticeable. But you have to line up these two bottom holes right here to the two bottom holes on the bottom rail. So I'm gonna go ahead and just shimmy this on here real quick, and then I'll show you guys what I'm talking about. So here we have the bracket kind of opened up with the hammer a little bit to slide it over the frame rail, and you can see that we have these bolts screwed into the existing threaded hole right here. And now what you have to do is go to the top and drill out the frame rail to allow this giant bolt to go through from the top to thread into that hole, and then you would have to put a nut and washer on this end. Go ahead and grab my permanent marker. Make sure your bracket is flushed onto the frame rail, and then go ahead and make your mark for where you have to drill out for the bolt, just like that. Passenger side motor mount is installed. The scratches are not too bad because I misaligned it the first time, but it is nice and secured into place and fully secured with the provided hardware. This thing is ready to hold some power down. So I'm gonna go ahead and move over to the subframe. The billet plate sits on the subframe itself, but before we put it on, let's assemble it. This right here is the plate that sits on top of the subframe, and then the motor mount that goes on that is this little weird triangular one right here, and it pretty much just goes on like so. But obviously you got to figure out how this sits on the subframe first to orientate the motor mount correctly. So I'll be right back. By the looks of it, the mount itself sits with the bushing facing the single bolt right here, and it looks like that, right? I want to say the hardware is the Allen headed ones right here, so I'm gonna go ahead and just take that out of the bag. I am gonna put some blue Loctite on this to ensure it doesn't come off. I know you guys hate it when I zap away, but I love it. Yes, sir. It's nice they provided the hardware, but no instructions of what bolt goes where. So we're just gonna figure out what goes into what. And I'm gonna need 3 14mm spec threaded, because I don't know the threads off the top of my head, bolts to go from here to the subframe. And by the looks of it, these two look the same, and this one is a much longer one. So I'm gonna assume it's this 3 here, because these 2 short one goes into the back, right? And this longer one goes to the front, because there is a little offset on the mount, if you guys can see that. There's a little spacer here. So the long bolt goes on the single one, and the 2 shorter one goes in the back. Don't forget your washers. Motor mount going on. Front bolt, rear bolt. I'll go ahead and use my L ratchet on this one. Rear mount installed. I wish I had bought it in black, to be honest with you, but it is what it is. This right here is the transmission mount, this weird triangular shape with all the holes on it. And then the mount that sits on top of here is the 3 bolt, which is this one right here. And this mount looks like the driver's side mount of a B-swap or a Cam EKEG DC. I'm pretty sure they're the same, but I mean, I could be wrong. Take note that this is offsetted. 2 bolts in the back are longer than the one that's in the front. I'm laying all the bolts out right now to figure out all of the sizes, and looks like there's a pair of each. I'm gonna assume that these mid-size bolts here are for the mount. For the rear bolts, they do stick out about 1 inch on the back side. Between these 2 bolts here, there is one that's a little longer, and I'm going to assume that the shorter one also goes onto the motor mount for the front. It sticks out a little more than 1 inch, so it could be for something else. I'm not sure yet. These 3 identical 17mm bolts, I'm going to assume is for the trans mount that goes onto the transmission. 1, 2, and 3. These 2 bolts right here are typically for the motor mounts. They are the longer 17mm. This super long one is for the passenger side motor mount to the bracket on the frame rail. I've noticed that that mount is a lot wider than the other one, so I'm gonna go ahead and just thread a nut to this and keep this to the side. Don't forget your washers. This other long 17mm bolt here is probably the rear or the driver's side motor mount. Grab 2 washers and a nut for that. Put it off to the side. These 2 identical mid-sized bolts right here is more than likely for the T-bracket to the transmission. That goes right here on the bottom. I want to say this bolt right here is for the passenger side motor mount to the post mount. The post mount typically has a stud on one side, and then it has a bolt that goes on the opposite end, and it looks like that is going to work. Don't forget your washer. And then I have this one last bolt right here. I'm going to assume that this is for the block to the rear T-bracket, which is this one right here. Something like that. So now let's go ahead and assemble the transmission mount to the bracket and get this thing ready for install. Don't forget your washers. Alrighty. So before we proceed with putting the engine into the car, we need to get the rear of the car off the jack stand so we can get the front to go down low enough that we can bolt the engine into the engine bay. Guys, I am stoked. The engine is finally in the car and we only have one more mount to go, and that is the rear T bracket right here. Now the thing is, this hole right here is threaded, and typically you're supposed to bolt through the transmission mount right here, and then it threads into this, except this is a different thread pitch because they provided hardware and they are all the same thread pitch. The provided hardware does not thread into it. I literally just stuck the nose in and turned it about twice, and it already stripped the bolt. So I don't have the bolt pitch for this hole. I think what I'm gonna have to do is I'm gonna have to drill out this hole to run the bolt completely through and run a nut on the back side. Aside from this, I have not test fitted this yet, but so far it is looking very promising. Now we also had to take off the subframe brace that went across right here because it was interfering with the transmission, and really not a big deal, but it would have been nice to have the extra support, but I get it. So I'm gonna go ahead and hollow out that hole and then we'll get this installed. I made the mistakes of jacking up the car too high, and it's kind of hard to reach over to the rear mount. So I'm standing in the engine bay with the engine in the car, and surprisingly I fit. But check this out. The rear mount tab is super bent out. I don't remember dropping this, but kind of weird. The bracket lines up to the rear mount. The bracket lines up to the two down at the trans, but this one is kind of off. So use my pry bar a little bit here and see if I can shimmy the bracket and the motor mount a little bit. Maybe a little hard, but I do need a longer bolt because this is not long enough to exit the other side to put a nut on it. So man, that rear T bracket was a little fight, especially because this hole right here didn't have the correct thread. So I didn't drill it all the way through. It was kind of tough to put a bolt through it. The first bolt that I put through stripped, the second one went through, and we have a nut secured on the back side. Both the bolts on the bottom where the transmission is at is secured, and the motor mount to the bracket is secured as well too. eBay motor mount didn't go in super duper smooth, but it wasn't complicated at all. And $130, I'm really not complaining. running, because this engine looks really good in the engine bay. One more thing I want to do for tonight is fit up the K24 header. This was in the wagon and I shortened it down at the runners. You can see where the welds are at. I shortened it down, welded it up, and this was actually in the wagon for a little while, and this should fit in that car. This header is a two-piece design. It has a 2.5-inch flange on the bottom where I cut and welded my own downpipe to obviously clock where I need it to go. But I know for sure this downpipe is going to sit more on the passenger side, because I made it clear the drive shaft, which sits on the left side of the car, right on this side for K series. So this is going to be a little close to the passenger side, and I know for a fact I'm gonna have to cut this and angle it more straighter in the tunnel. But for right now, I just want to fit it all together, and then I'll take care of this a different day. So let's go ahead and remove these 12s on the top and get this in blueberry. I don't need to put the shield on because this thing's going to be boosted soon after. I guess I'm just doing it to take some pictures and maybe post it up on the gram and stuff, you know. It's got that OE feel. It looks like a Type R motor, but fake it till you make it. I am super stoked. I really am. I bought this car maybe over a month ago, and we've been steadily making a ton of progress. And I'm so stoked to finally get into the engine part of this build, and it's moving along quite nicely. Now that the engine's in place, I can finally look at everything that I'm going to need to finish it up. I do have the intake manifold, which I unboxed with the throttle body. I have injectors, fuel rail. A lot of the fuel delivery stuff is already on hand, but I do most definitely need to buy fittings to convert the hard line into AN, which is this one, the return. This is the fuel tank breather. This one is the actual fuel line itself, which is all the way over here. I don't want to run the stock filter because the turbo stuff is going to sit right here, and I'm probably going to cut it up and do -6 down low. So I also need to get a fuel pressure regulator, whether I'm going to do remote mount here or on the fuel rail. I'll figure that out when I go and search it all up. I have the engine harness. I already have the conversion harness on order. I do have an ECU, but I'm unsure if I'm going to go with K-Tuner or K-Pro. And to keep it budget, I probably am leaning more towards K-Tuner. I do have one axle here, and this is driver's side. And this one I pulled from the junkyard from, I want to say, RSX base model. With this, that means I need to buy the passenger side, which is a female end that goes into the half shaft. I'll order that new from like O'Reilly's or something, because I've always ran O'Reilly stuff and never really given me any real issue. I ordered a Speed Factory thermal gasket that's going to be coming in tomorrow. I need to measure out the belt so I can go get the right size belt after installing the tensioner, which I am probably going to unbox tomorrow. I also noticed working around the engine bay that I don't even have the shifter cable bracket for the transmission. It's completely missing here, so I'm going to look for that as well too. When I did this support, I already kind of sorted out my radiator situation. Obviously, you guys see the tabs down there. I had moved it over, and obviously that is for a half core. I got a fan. I'm gonna have to make a shroud, and you know, all that stuff is gonna come here real soon, guys. The most important thing is getting the main thing into the car, and that is the 24. A lot more package to go through, a lot more stuff to install in the next few days here to come, and I'm stoked. I hope you guys are too. I'm gonna wrap up the video right here. If you guys enjoyed the progress update on Project Blueberry, man, be sure to leave a thumbs up. And if you guys want to stick around for more progress update on Blueberry, because I'm motivated now, much more than I was 10 seconds ago. But if you guys want to stick around for more Blueberry update, be sure to hit the subscribe button. But with that being said, thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.